Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we're going to dive into a literal masterclass in organizational restructuring. We are analyzing the massive, frankly unprecedented transitional phase of the Vancouver Canucks. You know, to really wrap your head around what's happening on the West Coast, you kind of have to think of it like a home renovation. Sometimes a fresh coat of paint just isn't going to cut it, right? Sometimes the structural integrity is just so compromised that you have to take the entire house all the way down to the studs to build it back up. And well, that is exactly where the Canucks find themselves today.
So, here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. We're going to systematically cover rock bottom in Vancouver, the new architects, changing locker room culture, the veteran trade block, the draft capital strategy, and finally, top targets in future.
Okay, let's jump right into it. Part 1. Rock bottom in Vancouver, establishing the graphical baseline.
To really appreciate the sheer scale of this rebuild, we have to unflinchingly look at the foundation. Minus 100. Wow. That is a staggering, honestly offensive goal differential statistic. It visually anchors exactly where this team is sitting right now. I mean, this isn't just a bad season. It's a blaring, flashing alarm bell indicating systemic failure across the entire ice.
When we expand this graphical baseline out, the full picture is, well, it's incredibly bleak. 25 wins, dead last, 32nd overall in the NHL, and a league-worst 71.5% penalty kill. These metrics reflect a fundamentally broken roster that allowed 316 goals against. To put that into perspective, you absolutely cannot just tweak a roster with these underlying metrics. You literally have to completely overhaul the whole shebang.
Moving right along to Part 2, the new architects, Johnson and Malhotra.
So, who do you even hire to execute a teardown of this magnitude? Enter General Manager Ryan Johnson, hired in mid-May, and his hand-picked head coach Manny Malhotra, who was brought on just weeks later. The absolute most crucial factor in how they plan to tackle this rebuild is their shared history. Get this, Johnson actually hired Malhotra 2 years ago for their AHL affiliate, where they promptly won a Calder Cup championship together. In a rebuild, absolute structural alignment between the GM and the head coach is completely non-negotiable. They're stepping into this massive project already speaking the exact same language, which is a huge advantage.
That brings us to Part 3, changing locker room culture, or fixing the foundation.
Now, speaking the same language in the front office is great, but it's really only half the battle, right? They have to change the dialogue inside the dressing room. I love this stark contrast we have here, 7 p.m. Friday games versus 8 a.m. Monday habits. Johnson has made it abundantly clear that they are going to demand players get super uncomfortable in practice. The focus isn't just going to be on the performance under the bright lights on game night. No, it's about the absolute certainty and structure expected early on a random Monday morning. They firmly believe that if you fix the 8 a.m. habits, those 7 p.m. wins, they're eventually going to take care of themselves.
Let's shift gears to Part 4, the veteran trade block, the subtraction phase.
This brings us to what is arguably the most difficult phase of any rebuild, subtraction. $7.25 million. That is the extremely hefty salary cap hit for winger Brock Boeser. Now look, Boeser had a completely legitimate offensive season with 48 points. But here's the massive disconnect we need to talk about. He also held a minus 48 rating on a 25-win team. That number screams that despite the individual production, something was fundamentally broken when he was out there on the ice.
I absolutely love this quote from the source material because it just perfectly captures the tension of what the Canucks are trying to pull off here. You don't build a new foundation around the old chandelier, no matter how nice it is. What you really should take away from this is that massive cap numbers rarely coexist comfortably with a complete teardown. Boeser still has real tangible value around the league, for sure, but keeping a highly paid veteran on a roster that is literally years away from competing, it often just ends up hindering both the player and the team's cap flexibility.
However, we got to be impartial here and look at how the new GM is actually approaching this. You might be thinking fire sale, but Johnson insists it's not a sell-off. You want to insulate players with great people. Despite all the intense media rumors swirling around, Johnson hasn't actually asked any veterans to waive their trade protection yet. He's actively speaking with other teams, but his strategy is super calculated. He doesn't just want to strip the team down to absolutely nothing. He wants to subtract carefully, ensuring that the young prospects who eventually come up are insulated by professionals who already carry that right culture.
All right, on to Part 5, the draft capital strategy, rebuilding through volume.
The entire point of trading away those old chandeliers is to stockpile for the future. Just look at this absolute war chest of assets. Barring any crazy trades, the Canucks are slated to select 4 times in the top 50 of the 2026 draft. We're talking 3rd overall, 24th overall, 33rd overall, and 41st overall. To put that into perspective, that 3rd overall selection is the highest this franchise has drafted since they orchestrated that legendary Sedin Twins monopoly all the way back in 1999. This is a literal franchise-altering opportunity.
But here's the harsh, totally unforgiving math of the NHL draft. We're looking at a nearly 50% bust rate for 24th overall draft picks over the last decade and a half. 6 out of the 13 players selected in that specific slot never even established themselves. So why does this matter? Well, it explains perfectly why a high volume of picks is absolutely crucial. Misses at the draft are inevitable. You're projecting the futures of literal teenagers. To guarantee multiple home runs, a rebuilding team simply needs as many at-bats as humanly possible.
And finally, Part 6, Top Targets and Future. Let's check out the 2026 draft board.
So with all of these at-bats, who are they swinging for to graph out their future? Let's look at the high-ceiling targets for that prized 3rd overall pick. You've got Ivar Steinberg out of Sweden, who's this elite offensive driver, and Chase Reed, a phenomenal, super smooth skating defenseman. But the most fascinating dynamic here is that first name, Caleb Malhotra. He's a high-character, two-way, first-line center prospect who absolutely tore up the OHL playoffs. Oh, and he also just happens to be the son of the Canucks' brand-new head coach, Manny Malhotra. No way, right? It is an incredibly highly anticipated storyline for draft day. Are they really going to make the call to bring the coach's son right into the pressure cooker of a total rebuild?
Now, after taking that massive, high-ceiling swing in round 1, management kinda has to look at the 2nd round differently to make sure this new house doesn't just immediately collapse. Here, we're looking at high-floor targets, players like William Hawkinson, Gleb Pugachev, and Chase Harrington. Look, these guys might not be the flashy superstar scorers on the highlight reels, but they possess clearly projectable NHL traits. They play hard, direct, and incredibly dependable defensive styles. As we established earlier with those 8 a.m. practice habits, the Canucks want to become much harder to play against. Snagging these high-floor prospects in the 2nd round is a super calculated way to guarantee a sturdy foundation of NHL consistency and work ethic for the new roster.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with the ultimate question. Will this volume-based, culture-first teardown actually be enough to pull them out of a -100 goal differential nightmare? I mean, they've got the blank canvas, they have the structurally aligned architects, and they certainly have the draft capital. But as we've seen, executing a rebuild requires both ruthless decisions on beloved veterans and a healthy dose of incredible luck on the draft floor. It is going to be absolutely fascinating to see how the Canucks navigate the coming weeks to build out their new reality. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this brought some serious clarity to the massive undertaking happening right now in Vancouver.